Bueno, tenemos la suerte maravillosa de tener con nosotros a Yvonne Farrell y Celine McNamara, Grafton Architects, es Pritzker Prize del año anterior, y han preparado una conferencia específica para la Bienal de Arquitectura Latinoamericana acerca de su relación con la arquitectura peruana. Las tenemos en la pantalla. No hace falta que presente su maravilloso currículum, su maravillosa obra. Todos sabemos quiénes son y tenemos la dicha, han sido generosísimas en poder, hubieran querido venir aquí, pero no han podido por las circunstancias que todos conocemos, que han hecho imposible moverse hasta España. Yvonne, Silly, the public is waiting for your lecture. Okay?
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, and you.
Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting us to speak today. We really miss not being with you all in Pamplona at this conference. And one of the many impacts of COVID, as we all still work remotely and apart, unfortunately, is that we miss experiencing the variety of enclosures that architecture gives us in experiencing life and the human encounters with others. Lino Bobardi has said, and I quote, "Until a person enters a building, climbs its steps, seizes the space in a human adventure that unfolds in time, architecture does not exist." End of quote. I don't fully agree with Bobardi that architecture doesn't exist fully that way, but I'm sure that buildings do get lonely for humans, that buildings wait longingly to capture not only light, but the people also that animate them. Today, many of you have had the wonderful actual experience of being in the Musea Foundation Otieza in Alzuza, Navarra, a building that resulted from the friendship of the sculptor Otieza and the architect Otieza. As part of the 2018 Venice Biennale, Shelley and I requested architects, A2 architects, to respond to that building. In the catalogue, A2 architects refer to Otieza's quest to render visible emptiness, empty space. They describe how Otieza set out to make these sharp, vigilant, and empty. They also describe Otieza's control of light to form atmosphere, how he set up relationships with Otieza's work and how he guides movement. The American writer, Pema Chodron, describes space as, and I quote, "not really emptiness as we know it. There's energy and color and movement. That emptiness is fluid and vivid." End of quote. Today, Shelley and I will give a lecture in 3 parts. Because the choreography of spaces needs to be actually experienced to be fully understood as architecture, reading plans and sections does not convey the complexity of volumes, the impact of the changing light throughout the day, the human interaction of space. So the first part of our lecture tonight, you sit back and watch a 10-minute film which we had commissioned of the building in Lima, UTEC. We wish to acknowledge the help of Patricia Siriani in finding the people who actually made this little film for us. And it captures, like Joyce's Ulysses, one day in the life of UTEC, weaving 4 people who work in the building and their journey into the building during one day from dawn to dusk. In the second part, I'll trace the beginnings of our investigations leading to the competition entry and the beginnings of our strategies, and Shelley will then take the baton to discuss how these ideas became reality. So we'll have this little film for 10 minutes. Okay, so as we go into part two, to describe to you that in 2011, the philanthropic Hochschild family, who had founded the TechSoup Technological Institutes, engaged Freddie Cooper Losa, the former dean of the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru's Architecture School, to organize an international competition, which we participated in. And for us, this extraordinary image of this desert city with 8 millimeters of rain on the coast by the Pacific was, which is 12 degrees south of the equator, became a unique experience for us. It raised the question, what is a university in this vibrant 21st century city? Educational questions, what could a university be in a place where the climate is unique, so little rainfall per year? What kind of insulation would a building need? A temperature mostly in the 20 degrees Celsius with the breeze from the Pacific Ocean. Could a university be an arena for learning? Could it be a man-made cliff? What spaces needed to be enclosed? What could remain outside? We believe, in terms of the world, that architecture, one of its roles is to heighten your awareness of where you are as an individual on this precious globe. And also, the more and more that the world is built, that we believe that architecture is the new geography. And one of the things that we discovered about the fog and the climate of Lima was that for us, it developed a way of understanding the physics of culture. This beautiful image, it was called Naturgemälde. It was made by Alexander von Humboldt. And in Andrea Wolf's book, The Invention of Nature, about von Humboldt, she described this beautiful drawing as being the first time that nature was described as a global force with corresponding climatic zones across continents. And no one before von Humboldt had presented complex data visually. And Humboldt saw that vegetation through the eyes of climate and location was in fact, was a new way of seeing data. It was a radical new idea, and that idea from the late 1700s and early 1800s now still shapes our understanding of the ecosystems of today. And so for us, as architects, we are not tourists. We want to see evidence afresh. Barragan, the Mexican architect, describes from one of his teacher friends that we have to see again with innocence, which is a beautiful phrase. And this beautiful image of the stones of Machu Picchu, which fit together like a jigsaw without the use of mortar. 6 surfaces interlocking stones. Years ago, a friend of mine sent me a postcard from Machu Picchu describing the stones in their beauty as cushions. And if we look also at the magnificence of the, if you like, the terraces made here, was a way of controlling and managing landscape in terms of growth, orientation, gravity, and organization. We wanted to use these and transform them in, if you like, a contemporary way. And the beauty of ancient crafts, taking gold and silver, and the techniques to transform these beautiful pieces into these exquisite pieces of jewelry and self-expression and symbolism. And these beautiful, what we find incredibly beautiful about these ephemeral and lost pieces, essentially lost, these quipu, that it was believed that the Inca had no formal writing, but they had these incredibly sophisticated quipu, using complex systems of strings and knots varying in size and color, representing details of crop measurements. These were a form of record keeping, maybe possibly describing events. So we were very conscious of strangers from the other side of the world coming into your complex heritage and treading carefully and trying to see what architecture, what we could, if you like, donate as architectural ideas. And one of the other amazing kinds of places that we came across were the huacas, made of adobe brick. And what's extraordinary about these places is that you can still see the hand imprint of other human beings that went before us. And this, you know, originating, you know, possibly 10,000 years ago as fishermen and farmers lived in the area of Lima. And these were being built as ceremonial platforms for gathering or administrative or ceremonial uses. So we were very aware that we were arriving into this incredibly sophisticated place, beginning our ideas of how we would respond. So we looked in the ordinary ways of architects. We looked at the place close to the ocean affected by the von Humboldt current, the 40-meter high extraordinary cliffs that protect the city from the ocean. Then we began studying what it was required by this new university. It was besides these are our sketches of the cliffs of the valley where the site was, about 360 meters long, narrow site by a motorway. And in section, we understood the requirements of the new university, of big spaces for laboratories, smaller spaces for research rooms, and smaller spaces for office and library. And the context being the busy road and the beautiful area of Barranca. So we wanted to, if you like, design a section that shouldered the noisy motorway on one side and the gentle residential area on the other. So looking again at the site, the arrival, the horseshoe, the kind of banana-shaped site along the motorway, moving up from the valley into the area. And also we reached into the kind of resources of things that we admired in South America. And we are aware that this Biennale is really of Latin American architecture and the celebration of that. And we had for many years admired these extraordinary buildings where, because of benign climate, that the relationship between, like in this wonderful Mendes de Rocha project of the stadium, where the focus, yes, is on the soccer pitch, the grass, but it's also the liberation that structure allows for the socializing beneath these enormous structures. And also the Artigas, this sense of structure being the companion of architecture, that this system of holding and feeling gravity becomes part of the architectural experience. And looking at Luis Can up further in California, carving because of shadow and because of depth and because of heat and cooling, that these carved spaces provide protection and forming the kind of place for human interaction. So we developed for the competition this section whereby we held into the ground the parking and the bigger spaces. So the auditoria and the parking become a kind of a carved lower ground sense. And we positioned the laboratories as these large suspended spaces in terms of thinking about what a university, a vertical university could be. Could it be a stadium for learning? Could we have circulation that became if you like, the paths on which people could enjoy the city of Lima, but also the various overlaps of educational opportunities provided by a university. And also going back to the wonderful terraces of Machu Picchu and carving into the mountain, that making a contemporary mountain, that the roofs of the bigger spaces would be useful. And in this case, that the big spaces on the lower levels would provide smaller intimate spaces for students. And as we went up through the section from big laboratories to smaller study spaces to classrooms to the library, that we would have, if you like, a way of enjoying Barranca and also have places in which protection from the sun, we're 12 degrees down from the equator, that the sun has its power in terms of light, but it also needs human skin to be protected. So this became our section for the competition. And it's interesting, at this stage, we had a bridge that linked across to Miraflores, across the motorway at this stage in the competition. And the plan, which was for a university that would be built in 3 sections, over three times, the first section, the second, and the third. And we developed the entry towards the ocean that you enter in the nose to here, and we placed the various auditoria on this lower level with the parking below. And you see here that at competition stage, we linked across the motorway to Miraflores. In terms then of thinking of this vertical composition, this vertical university, we took a system of circulation like a stadium, that we would every 20 meters that we would have a structure that repeated, that we would have circulation that would link vertically, and that we would protect the vertical university by a type of ribbon or protection, sound protection along by the motorway, and provide a cap, like a peaked cap up here that would protect from the high angle sun. And going back to the Huacas, what was very beautiful for us was really that this was modified ground, that they had made bricks from the very natural material below their feet, and that when we were thinking of the elevation of the new UTEC University, that we would take an example that concrete is a kind of contemporary mud, that we would transform the face of the building, which was also a beginning in our minds that there would be an expression of an engineering university, that as you drove along the motorway, that the architecture expressed, if you like, the symbolism of a vertical university, but also that it had a presence within the city. And this was a drawing we did for the competition, describing the building's presence along the motorway, and the elevation as it moves up into the foggy atmosphere of the city of Lima, that it vanishes as it touches the clouds. And also weaving landscape. It's interesting, we've just finished a project here in Dublin, in a Georgian street. It's 120 meters long of a Georgian street in brick. And also the Georgians weaved landscape into their buildings, which we have done here. And also in the Lima UTEC, that we wanted landscape to be woven not only into the cascading section towards Barranca, but also be part of the experience between that and the motorway. And in 2012, when David Chipperfield was director of the Venice Biennale, the theme was common ground. And for us, we were invited to participate, and for us, we had just really begun the study of moving into, we'd won the competition for UTEC at this stage, and it was a wonderful opportunity to celebrate this fusion of us as architects, but also a tribute to the wonderful work of architects and engineers in South America. So what we presented was really a fusion of our beginning work. We called it From Ruin to Realization. These are 1 to 20 models of sections through our ambition for UTEC. How would we make these pieces of man-made geography, where we carved into the soil of Lima and made these cascading spaces and made the structure to hold them. And on the wall, you see our tribute to Mendes de Rocha. This is the UTEC plan and the plan of part of his stadium in Dorado. And this little symbol which we worked was really the little sketch is Machu Picchu and Skellig Michel, which is here in Ireland, and then these are the timber foundations going into the ground of Venice. So this became for us, the graphics on the wall are ones that you've seen, these the beginnings of architectural ideas, which are the tiny DNA trying to find a concept that holds a complex new reality together. And on the right-hand side is this paper model at 1:500, which is describing the UTEC ambition, the folded wall at the base to protect from the motorway, the first structure, number one, and the cascading surfaces of bigger and useful surfaces below, facing over to Barranca. And this image, which we've shown before, but was also in the Biennale of 2012, and when we were putting it up on the wall, the workmen said, why are you putting up two images of the same thing? And for us, what's extraordinary is that on the left-hand side is the Peruvian marvel of Machu Picchu, with its a mountain behind and the intimacy of these beautiful garden terraces. And on the right-hand side is Skellig Michel, which is a monastic settlement on the island of Skellig Michel, which is off the coast of southwest Ireland in the Atlantic. And these are the cells, these dry stone beehive huts, the individual cells of the monks with their tiny gardens as they clung to this cliff to survive out in the Atlantic, in the same way as the Incas made their city high up in the Andes. But the extraordinary similarities between the life and just the image of the two mountains and the dry stone wall buildings. So we began then, this image and the next one is really the scientific beginning of taking a concept of a new vertical university 12 degrees down from the equator in a unique city with its own unique climate. Could we as architects consider in the 21st century a sense of sustainability and a type of architecture which would emphasize the uniqueness of Lima and that would invent, if you like, a new way of dealing with space. So these red drawings are really the lux, it's 500 lux, how we make spaces that provide educational resource spaces for students and for the professors, but also link into the climatic conditions of place. And the last image that I'll speak to before Shelley begins her section is this drawing where we're looking at the, if you like, the horizontal impact of the building in the structure of Lima and our sections as we study vertical circulation and sun, direct sun, and shadow.
This lecture gives us an opportunity to think back on this, what was an incredible experience for us. When we did this competition, we couldn't resist it. It was a ridiculous thing for us to do in Dublin to compete for a project in Lima. And we thought, well, it doesn't matter, we're not going to win anyway. And then we won, and we found ourselves in Lima not knowing anybody. It was before we met our friends, Barclay Cruz and others. And we were, I would say, we were full of fear and trepidation, trying to negotiate fees with mining engineers in Peru. And when we read the brief and the program, we thought that the design program was impossible, we thought the building program was impossible, and we thought the budget for construction was impossible. So we started this incredible journey, and what we found was that people were decent, were kind, were respectful. We operated in very different kinds of climates in terms of construction, where that is not always the case. And we found our team incredibly professional. Team of people who supported us: Carlos Casavon, the engineer, Alejandro Schell, the architects, and we found ourselves on site with 900 men, 2 cranes, 2 almost separate building sites moving in parallel. And the vision and ambition of the client was unstoppable. This was like a huge operation that just started up and we just had to keep up with it. And this was going to happen almost with or without us. We had to actually really run to keep up with the pace of this work, and it was extraordinary to experience. And the scale of the operation, because of the program, because it was so quick, it was similar in size to the Bocconi University, but again, I suppose that's the amazing thing about working as an architect. When you go to work in another place, you see the culture of construction. You kind of see through the process of building, you experience the way that society works. And this was an extraordinary revelation for us. We found the contractors and the site engineers were marvelous. The thing of making this shuttering for this protective wall, as Yvonne has described, was very complex. We really enjoyed going on site and examining samples with them. We weren't quite sure what way this project was going to work in terms of finish, in terms of workmanship, in terms of organization. But what we found was that the project was robust enough to somehow survive. And probably because it's really considered as a piece of infrastructure, as Yvonne has described, that it's a piece of infrastructure within which students could learn, within which a university could operate. And it's kind of, it's a vertical university by virtue of the scale of the site, which is very tight. It has, because of the climate which Yvonne has described, we realized that everything could be outside except for the teaching spaces. And this was a fantastic liberation. I would say that the whole feeling of this project for us in terms of our development as architects, or in terms of challenge, was what we always remember was that sense of liberation. Yes, a sense of challenge, but really that everything seemed to be working together in parallel towards a common goal. We love these moments in buildings where you see what we were dreaming and trying to do, that students would always be connected with their city. So these moments where a student stops and studies at an opening where there's no glass, you don't need the windows. We come from, we've just finished a building in the west of Ireland where the rain is horizontal and where it's cold and windy, and here we are in this amazing kind of climate. And it's not what you would call, there are virtually no finishes in this building. It really is a skeleton, an inhabited skeleton. The separating of the circulation from the teaching spaces means that as you move on the bridges parallel with the motorway, you can always see into the laboratories and the teaching spaces. The stepping of the terraces to Barranco was really important for us. We remember Patricia Siriani organized a lecture that we would give in Lima shortly after we had won the competition. And there was somebody from Barranco in the audience, and still remember he said, that was a very interesting lecture, it's a very interesting building, but do you think you could stand it on? Do you think you could get it to lie down on its side, or better still, do you think you could put it somewhere else? And Yvonne suggested that perhaps when it was finished that we could go and have a pisco sour and discuss it, but we've never had the chance to do this. It's something we would love to do. We've always been interested in the relationship between infrastructure and architecture, and how much can structure do, how much can the skeleton do of a building in terms of space making, in terms of I suppose effectively that the first moves that you make in terms of structure is the space maker. And here, because of the climate, we really had the opportunity to develop this. This project is not unlike the Bocconi University in many ways, because we also looked at infrastructure and we looked at South American architects because of the ability of South American architects to make heroic structures which people can inhabit. And here, I think because of the shape of the site, the boomerang shape of the site, while the structure looks rational and planned, the fact that it keeps shifting because of this curved shape, so it's no longer linear. You can't see from one end to the other, so there is no axis. You keep discovering this building as you move along its length. So it's rational in some ways, but in reality, it's a very organic, changeable thing. And the idea of starting with a wide footprint and then it gets narrower as it goes up was something prescribed by the brief. The big laboratories becoming smaller classrooms, becoming the library at the top, and this working together with the light was very much a part of the thinking in the making of the project. I would say that some of the diagrams that Yvonne showed in thinking about the light, the many surprises that we got working in Lima was the nature of the light, that when the fog, when it became foggy, it became cold, sometimes even though it was really hot, supposedly, but then the humidity and the fog made your skin feel cold. And at the same time, when it's foggy, sometimes the light still hurts your eyes, because it's almost like the fog is liquid light, and it refracts the light, and it hurts your eyes, and it's completely different to the fog of Milano, for instance. So we discovered that fog is different, and light is different in different climates, dependent on its humidity. We were worried about how dark the lower levels would be, because the teaching spaces and this public circulation route was very important, and it's down so many levels, and we, at the same time, we were worried about protection from the heat of the sun. So the thing that's interesting is that the light is dulled by the fog, but it's still there, and it's still intense, and it's still present. And this is something that we found kind of extraordinary. Yvonne talked about architecture as new geography, and the thing of being inspired by the cliff, and thinking on the one hand about this vertical university being like an inhabited cliff or being an arena for learning. One of the things that we found about the strategy for the control of the environment, because each level steps further and further north towards the sun, that you never see the sky. So that when you're in the space, which appears really perfect from the outside, it feels completely solid inside, which was a contradiction in terms in many ways from our point of view, that something that feels very open to the motorway and to the public edge, that when you go inside, it has this cave-like feeling. And it was interesting when the scaffolding came down from this building, and we went to Lima. We were really shocked by the sensation of the scale of I mean, when scaffolding is removed, it's always a kind of terrifying time, because the building suddenly becomes exposed and there's no way back. But when this scaffolding was removed, I have to say, both Yvonne and I were really and truly amazed by the scale of the building, by the strength of the building. We knew it was going to have a strong presence in the city. We possibly didn't expect that it would be quite that strong. And internally, we were amazed by this thing of solidity and perfect kind of quality. We were asked to have lunch with Eduardo Hochschild, which was the first time, and we thought, oh my God, we're in trouble. And he really wanted, this was at the same time when the scaffolding came down, and we thought that there's trouble. But actually, he was of all of the clients we've ever had, he was amazed and kept saying to us, "How did you think about this? Where did this come from? How did you make this building?" And we started speaking about inhabited cliffs and about being interested in geology and the relationship between geology and architecture. And it was kind of interesting. It was kind of an unconscious connection between mining engineering and architecture. And he started to talk about his main geologist, and that looking for seams of gold in a mountain is not so easy, and that his geologist usually discovered the seam of gold in his dreams because he'd been concentrating so much on how to find it. And we thought this was amazing. It's a bit like architecture, that you really struggle and you find the seam of an idea when you stop worrying about things, or maybe when you dream. And it's still a kind of dream to us, looking back on this, to remember all of the experiences that we had in Lima in terms of making a building of this scale and of this type. It's the first time we've ever been able to make a building without windows, and really as a piece of inhabited infrastructure. It has really stretched our thinking in terms of typology, in terms of architecture, that you can think about a university as being an inhabited bridge or an inhabited viaduct or an inhabited football stadium. The typologies are not sacred, that one can think about what, you know, what does this site suggest, and what could it mean, and what could it do as a place of learning. And this is what I mean about the thing of looking at this building from the outside, and it feels very open and porous, and you go inside and it feels solid. And how amazing that was for us as a discovery. And just like to finish, because you're in Pamplona and we're not, and we're remembering our first trip as an office. We had, for the first time in our lives, I think it was in 2000, we had enough money to go together on an office trip, and we went to San Sebastian, and we went to the studios of Chillida. And his work has affected us all of our lives because of his ability to trap light within a solid form. And in a sense, this image reminds us of the kind of feeling that we had when we went inside for the first time, when the scaffolding was removed, when we went into this building in Utrecht. We have a lot to thank Peru for. I still remember a wonderful, provocative, witty, you could say assertive, unusual lecture given by Henri Siriani in Dublin probably 35, 40 years ago. I still remember the effect it had on me, and I wondered about this guy. And we had been looking at his work for many years as young students, so it was a real pleasure to see his head fill our screen this evening, as it was to see our other friends from Lima, Barclay Cruz, and our lovely host. It's so strange sitting here in Yvonne's living room in the dark, looking at this dark screen. We can't see anybody, but we just want to say thanks to Peru, and thanks to all of you for inviting us, and we wish we were there with you.
Many thanks for your extraordinary lecture. I want to propose to you a question. It's a daring question, maybe. No, for me, the building is extraordinary. It's a very adequate answer to the climate, to the site, to the landscape of Lima. But I know that after many people questioning many things and but do you repeat the building? If you rebuild the building right now, you rebuild it in the exactly same way? It's a daring question, but after some years that you finish that, what do you see?
I think it's a very interesting question. I think that we have and we are building many university buildings, and when we I'll take this off when I speak. And as we do, we are talking with administration and with users, and you sit down in detail with people. For us, in this competition, it was a brand new university. It had not existed before. So it meant that for the Hochschild educational idea, anything was possible. And I think that what happens with universities now is that when universities are established, people have very specific ways of thinking about education. So there are probably good things about what we have done, and there are probably not so good things at what we have done, and that people change and things happen, and universities are built in different ways. And for us, for Shelley and I, and for our team, one of the biggest questions is, what is a university of the future? What is a university? Mm-hmm. Are they always small little buildings that are built when money becomes available, and then you build another bit, and then you build another bit? But in this case, the Hochschild situation and TechSoup, going from a technological school to a university, it was an ambition of the future. And we think that what really is interesting about that is that it's more, as Shelley has described, it's more like, it's at one level it's a cave. It's also about sustainability. We wanted to invent with this university a place for sustainability, that the breeze from the ocean would come into to a building and work, that we wanted that the sun would do its job and be protected from it. So your question about would we repeat it, I think it's a strategy about finding the unique characteristics of a place and then finding an architectural response to that. That's what we would repeat. But Lima is unique. So you can't do Lima in, in Alaska. It just, yes. That doesn't work. Yes. So what we're saying is, it's more about an effort for sustainability. We might have got some things wrong, but I think it was a genuine futuristic idea of how do you link with culture and place, that a university can be a carved, it's like a cave, protection but open. So strategically, all the ideas are possible in different places, but not the same result.
Okay. ¿Alguno quiere hacer alguna pregunta? Carlos, ¿nadie? ¿Alguien? ¿Sí? No more questions. The people is... No, sí, one question. Ven aquí. Yes. One more question.
Yeah, well, more than a question, just to give you thanks and explore a little bit more further. Well, first of all, my name is Carlos Labarta. I'm teaching architecture in the School of Navarra. And in terms of what you have exposed about the inhabiting an infrastructure, right? Starting from all these masters, as Mendes da Rocha or others, that we as Europeans, how we have learned from them so much, and we still learn from them. Could you explore or expand a little bit more from your fantastic work that you have? I mean, we all knew that, but the way you have explained it, if you could go a little bit further in the way of how architecture in the future, in terms of inhabiting an infrastructure, in terms that we are dealing with, of course, movement, motorways, highways, all this, which is in a way threatening our let's say our pleasure times of architecture without all these noisy things that happen in our contemporary life. We many times have heard about infrastructure and architecture, but many few times we have learned from schemes and from not from infrastructure of the one you've set here. So just to expand that issue of infrastructure and architecture.
What is really important about your question is that something Shelley and I often discuss, that what tends to happen in society, is
okay.
that architects are dealing with building and the huge infrastructure of how water is retained, how soil, if you like, the sewage treatments are done. That in terms of infrastructure, we fundamentally believe that as a profession, we should be more involved in the making of cities where infrastructure of water, of how you deal with all the issues of air, are that architects need to be in stronger places in society, so that it's not just infrastructure of buildings being ledges and staircases, but that we as a profession are incredibly positioned to contribute to fusing of the separate elements. When you talk about the noise and traffic, whatever, of cities, we would argue that it's because everything is separate, and that the wonderful thing about the training of architects is that we are synthesizers. We think in a complex way, and we are very well positioned to find overlap and to find opportunity. Sorry, it's really about the questions about infrastructure, about architecture and infrastructure.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we were struck by, I would say more than struck, I would say shocked, when we first saw the work of some of the South American architects, was that it had this rudimentary quality, but at the same time, spatially, it was fantastic. And it was because most of those architects were engineers as well as architects, or were trained in schools of engineering, where engineering and architecture were not separate. So it wasn't considered to be a separate thing. I mean, for instance, the tennis club designed by Villanova Artigas that looks like a bridge. You know, they looked like inhabited bridges or viaducts or something. And we found this connection between engineering and architecture so strong in this work that it really, it changed our path in reality. It changed our path in thinking about space making and ways of making buildings, that engineering is not a separate thing, that structure is the core of architecture. And I think what Yvonne is speaking about is part of the problem of the profession of architecture nowadays, is that we're sidelined and we've lost our position. And the design of roads is probably one of the key things that affects our daily lives. And it's something that we think, I suppose one of the most one of the kind of most important coincidence of design of roads and motorways and city for us would be something, say in Barcelona, where heavy traffic can be taken through the city and still feel civilized, because architects and engineers and planners are working together. So it's something that's really important. But there's also an architectural, it's not so much theoretical sort of conceptual. There's something fantastic from our point of view of the relationship between architecture and infrastructure, something that Walter Benjamin said, that somehow buildings should leave room for the unexpected, something that the architect never expected, that there's something unfinished about pieces of infrastructure, that not every moment is controlled, that it's this thing that you can inhabit. And that's something we find very compelling as an idea, that there's an open-endedness to architecture, that there's an open-endedness to a way of making a building which can invite another life in the future, in the way that ruins do. Yvonne was describing us making fragments of a building which was not yet born, which was our new competition win. We didn't know how to do it, and we just made these big fragments. So, and then we realized they were like ruins in reverse. So I think we're probably going on a roundabout way of answering your question, but it's something that's very close to our hearts, both for practical reasons, for professional reasons, and spatial architectural reasons.
I think if I could add two things to your question. One is that one of the things that we have to fight as architects, that architecture is not design that
That's
you
it.
kind of apply, that
That's right.
architecture is, if you like, a cultural phenomenon that we are very privileged to be part of. And the other thing is that in our practice, what was interesting is that we became involved with structural engineers on motorway bridges. So we were looking at larger structures, and as we were doing that, we started to make structure become stronger in our work. And then we won the Bocconi competition, and structure became even stronger again. So I think we also, as a profession, have lost the opportunity, the relationship between allowing structure to be the twin or the companion of architecture. That now it is wrapped and lost, and it's really a very, very lost skeleton within the making of space.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Really, we appreciate, and particularly I appreciate how you expand our field in this way. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
More questions? We have time for another not more, because the time is no more. Thank you for your generosity, and I hope to see you again very soon in Pamplona. I look for another opportunity to invite you, and I hope that in another circumstance that permitted you to travel to Pamplona, no? As you
It's been a
remember,
pleasure.
it's
Thank
a very, very kindly town, and it's a very interesting place. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
very
much.
much.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Have a nice evening.